Birthed from the ashes of the Red Ribbon Army's destruction at the hands of Son Goku in Dragon Ball Z would introduce us to this new threat. Even more powerful than any before them, and yet man-made on Earth. These are the Jinzo Ningen, literally translating to artificial humans who became a major problem for our heroes, and this time the grand pinch is even grander as Son Goku has been afflicted with a heart virus. These technological terrors are far and away more advanced warriors than anybody expected, rooted in one scientist's lifelong obsession with destroying the boy who wiped out his Red Ribbon brethren. Call them androids, cyborgs, artificial humans, or whatever you wish. They became a massive staple in Dragon Ball's franchise in the 90s and even made their mark in 2022's Dragon Ball Super Superhero film. On this edition of the critically acclaimed series Dragon Ball In-Depth, we will go into the entire history of the androids from the very first failed creation to the more recent Gamma experiments. We will study all models throughout franchise history, and by the time this video concludes, you'll know everything there is to know about the androids in this behemoth edition of Dragon Ball In-Depth. Before we delve into the artificial humans, be sure that you watch the entire edition of Dragon Ball In-Depth that preceded this one, The History of the Red Ribbon Army, to familiarize yourself with the army that the androids were birthed from and their history, as we will somewhat be referencing it in this video. The Red Ribbon Army was destroyed by Goku, and with Commander Red and Staff Officer Black meeting their deaths, the world would be safe from their tyranny. But not everything was as it seemed. Although the Empire was left in shambles, there were survivors. We found out in Dragon Ball Z that one survivor in particular would be a focal point of the story, and that is scientist Dr. Gero. In the English dub, they pronounce it Gero, but that's legitimately wrong.
Dr. Gero.
Also in the English dub, Trunks tells Goku that he let Gero survive, and that's not in the Japanese version at all. Dr. Gero is nowhere to be found in Dragon Ball. Series creator Akira Toriyama didn't even come up with the idea for Dr. Gero until the early 90s when he was wrapping up the Frieza saga. In 1991, a little movie came out called Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Toriyama was a huge fan of the first Terminator from 1984, and so I find it more than a coincidence Toriyama would craft a story about futuristic cyborgs conquering mankind right around the same time this movie was coming out. Terminator 2 came out on July 3rd, 1991. The first manga chapter of the Android saga would be Dragon Ball Manga Chapter 329, which came out June 18th of 1991. Now, obviously Toriyama didn't see T2 before starting this arc, but the movie was absolutely promoted for months before release, so he knew it was coming. He loved the original and thus decided to craft his own story around that concept. This idea of artificial intelligence conquering the world has been done many times. Don't forget stuff like The Matrix and classic TV shows like Outer Limits, and also 1927's Metropolis film, which predates both Dragon Ball and Terminator, and they've all used this idea. But with Dragon Ball, Toriyama had to not only insert the science fiction aspect of the storytelling, but also combine it with martial arts combat, which became a staple of Dragon Ball. We found out in Dragon Ball Super Superhero that even though the Red Ribbon Army was wiped out, along with its leader Commander Red, his son Magenta continued onward and created a new company called Red Pharmaceuticals, which would act as a public front for his secret rebuilding of the Red Ribbon Army in the shadows. During this rebuilding phase, he secretly funded Dr. Gero behind the scenes as he began to construct newer and more powerful artificial humans until they would finally be revealed in DBZ. Not including, of course, Android 8, which was introduced during the Red Ribbon arc. We don't know where Dr. Gero was during that time. And like I just said, Toriyama created him many years later, but you could argue that he either escaped from the Red Ribbon headquarters or was in a different base. But either way, he survived and had a chip on his shoulder because his entire life had been taken from him by Goku. So once again, Goku's actions in the original Dragon Ball when he was a kid have ramifications for what would happen when he would grow up in Dragon Ball Z. It took Gero years to create something that stood a chance against the power of Goku and his friends, and thanks to his microscopic spy robot, he was able to gather data to give him the measuring stick of how far he wanted his creations to go power-wise. Dr. Gero is the creator of the artificial humans, and on this video we're going to go through every model with as much detail as possible. He became so obsessed with revenge against Son Goku that he would turn himself into an android, but more on that later. Let's begin now by going back to the early models and then work our way up. Not much is known about the early androids, specifically 1 through 7 and 10 through 12. The only information we have are vague guidebook references that state that they absolutely existed but were all failed experiments. We can assume that the Red Ribbon Army chose to destroy them and just start over with new models. The idea behind the android numbers is once again taken from the Terminator franchise, where different models have different names, such as the T-800, T-1000, etc., just simplified here with smaller numbers. In the DBZ anime, we briefly see a shot of a number of unfinished robots in a flashback to Gero's laboratory. So these could have been the mysterious, never-before-seen androids. But when it comes to the first artificial human that we actually meet, it would be Sergeant Metallic, whom I discussed in the History of the Red Ribbon Army video. Now this is an interesting case because, as I said in that video, he was modeled after the T-800 Cyberdyne Systems Model 101 Terminator from 1984's The Terminator, directed by James Cameron and portrayed by Arnold Schwarzenegger. However, unlike the other models, he does not have a number. This has led to a number of fan theories about his origin. Perhaps he wasn't created by Gero. Perhaps he was an early model who had a number, but Toriyama never told us what that number was. Either way, he shares a lot of similarities with Artificial Human 16, whom we will discuss later, including being an Arnold ripoff. One funny aspect about Major Metallitron, aka Sergeant Metallic, is that if you play the Famicom game Dragon Ball 3 Gokuden, which never came out in the US, by the way, there are enemies that look just like him called Terminators. There was even a story arc in Dokkan Battle where they mass-produced these. I wouldn't be surprised if he was the original prototype android, which Goku was easily able to defeat. Unlike some of the others, he is 100% artificial, so he's basically a robot. Not organic at all. In Dragon Ball GT, during the Super 17 arc, we see him utilize a rocket punch where his fists are blasted from his arms, just like how 16 does. He has a very brief appearance in Dragon Ball Movie 3 Mystical Grand Adventure as part of the Mifan Empire and is easily decapitated by Goku. In the Path to Power movie, Toriyama would give his design a complete overhaul, as now he has dark skin and no hair, not even remotely resembling Arnold. Also, for some weird reason, Viz calls him Full Metal Jacket in their translation of the manga. No idea why they did that. Other than that, not much else is known. The other artificial human that we meet during this part of the story is artificial human number 8, aka Hachan, or Aider in the dub. He's the first android to be designated with a number, implying they are from Gero, although the Dragon Ball anime throws a small and weird monkey wrench into that. I'll get to that in just a second. His design is purposely meant to resemble the Frankenstein monster. Despite looking like a monster, he's actually very good-natured and not evil at all, which could be why he was considered a failure. Murasaki the ninja activates 8 and tries to sick him on Goku, but 8 refuses to fight. Murasaki threatens to detonate 8 via remote control. Goku knocks it out of his hand, and the rest is history. He becomes friends with Goku and ends up living with Snow. He is seen a few more times in the series and even has a cameo in the Dragon Ball Super anime in the Future Trunks arc. Now, speaking of anime, Toei Animation threw in a huge monkey wrench when it comes to the origin of the androids, and I'm talking about Dr. Frapp, or Flap. Dr. Frapp was an anime-only character who only appeared in one episode, Dragon Ball Episode 42. Frapp was said to be Ader's creator, and the character had a change of heart when he realized how dangerous it is to place a bomb inside of 8. But wait, who was Dr. Frapp, and why did they say he created 8? Was he Dr. Gero's assistant or something? There are fan theories, but that's just headcanon and not the truth. The truth is that Toei Animation made him up without consulting with Toriyama years before the Dragon Ball Z Android saga, and Toriyama was never told and thus just came up with his own origin story years later. People need to understand that Toriyama did not oversee the anime. He was writing the manga and the original story. While he did help the anime staff quite a bit when called upon, he was rarely told about the times that Toei Animation would go into business for themselves and give things explanations without consulting with him. We see this even earlier in Dragon Ball when Toei explained the origin of the Dragon Balls, which completely contradicts what we would discover years later. This is one of those circumstances, and it happens quite a bit in the series and is still going on today with Dragon Ball Super. This is why Frapp is never mentioned again in the series. So that's the story of Frapp and Ader, but what about Android 9? Well, Android 9 was never seen in any of the anime or manga, but he does exist in the MMORPG Dragon Ball Online, which Toriyama did help to work on. If you saw the Red Ribbon Army Dragon Ball in-depth video, you'll remember I discussed the Red Pants Army. Android 9 ties into that. He was created by Dr. Gero at some point after Goku's defeat of the Red Ribbon Army as a completely artificial reconstruction of Commander Red. He was brought back by the Red Pants Army and is a boss in the game. He would be the first android that was created, modeled over somebody Dr. Gero was close to, followed by 16 and 21, whom we'll discuss later. Also, here's a fun fact. In Naho Oishi's comedic retelling manga, Dragon Ball SD, there is another Android 9 in it. This would be an android referred to as Iokugo. Iokugo is an android version of Dragon Ball Room head and Shueisha executive producer Akio Ioku, who was defeated by Kid Goku. This is a deep, deep cut and a deep Easter egg. When it comes to Android 10 through 12, we know literally nothing more, and thus on the next section, we're heading into the 90s, specifically Dragon Ball Z Movie 7, as we talk about Androids 13, 14, and 15. On July 11th, 1992, Dragon Ball Z Movie 7 Extreme Battle, the three great Super Saiyans, known as Super Android 13 in the English dub, was released to Japanese theaters. Now, don't get confused. This movie was released during the Android arc after we already saw the reveals of 16 through 20 in the main series. The movie's concept is based on the androids already revealed in the manga and bears a similarity to Cell. So we're covering these androids now because I wanted to group them together for simplicity and understanding. Plus, those androids are way more important than these. Everybody by now knows that the original 13 Dragon Ball Z movies don't take place in the main continuity. They're what-if side stories written by Takao Koyama with input from Toei writers and character designs mostly by Toriyama. So in the 90s, they chose to create 3 new anime-exclusive anime movie exclusive that is, artificial humans, and Toriyama agreed and designed all of them specifically for the movie. They never appear in the manga and aren't even discussed. Because they take place in a different timeline, so to speak, the series of events differs. Like the main story, 17 kills Dr. Gero, but none of the Z fighters are anywhere to be found in this timeline. Afterward, the supercomputer hidden beneath the laboratory completes the designs for 3 backup models that would activate just in case there was a betrayal. These models were created for the sole purpose of killing Son Goku as their primary objective and have the same data that the other androids have, including knowledge of Vegeta and Trunks. 17 would not be seen again in the film, and his whereabouts are unknown. Cell also does not appear in the film, and many have wondered about his whereabouts or whether or not he even exists in this timeline. One theory that always made sense to me and is, in my opinion, pretty decent headcanon, is that the schematics of 13 through 15 were pre-programmed into the supercomputer which completed the actual manufacturing of them. And as a result of that, we get what we got. The first 2 to be unleashed were 14 and 15. In the original design sheet from Toriyama, 14 and 15's names were opposite of each other, but Toei Animation and Bandai strangely swapped the name for merchandise purposes. So 15 is 14 and 14 is 13, but I digress. They were the first to attack. Now, something that should be explained is that the 14 and 15 artificial humans models are completely artificial in nature, like robots. They do not have a human mortal base. Android 13, however, that's a different story. He is the real villain of the movie and the last to be awakened. 13's goal is also to kill Son Goku, but like Cell, he is a biomechanical android. He is mostly composed of an artificial construct, but has the ability to transform into Super 13 as a failsafe in case 14 and 15 are destroyed. 14 and 15's main CPU and energy generators are absorbed by 13 into his temple and chest, triggering his transformation into Super 13. Obviously, Toei Animation based this concept directly from Cell, which has led to some fan theories that state that 13 may have been an early Cell prototype. When he transforms into Super 13, he has massive muscles, orange spiky hair, and blue skin. I've joked in the past that he looks like a blue Broly. With this newfound combined power, Super 13 chews through the Z fighters with ease until Goku defeats him by absorbing a Genki Dama while transformed, which harnessed enough power to disintegrate his entire body. After 13 dies, the supercomputer in the laboratory basement shuts down and is never heard from again. Now, what we're going to do is go back a bit to the start of the story arc in the manga and anime, and this time go in order by introduction, starting with 19 and 20 and moving down the list. This all started with Dr. Gero, so it makes sense that he be instrumental in his own vengeance. Just the first time that we as an audience were made aware that the androids were an imposing threat was from future Trunks at the start of the arc, who warned them about his future timeline. A timeline where Goku died of a heart virus and the remaining Z fighters were unprepared for the terror that was incoming. Trunks warned them that in 3 years, on an island 9 kilometers southwest of South City, 2 would appear. Now, in the manga, both Japanese and English Viz translations, Trunks refers to the androids from the future as 19 and 20. But that's not what we saw later, as it was revealed that 17 and 18 were the androids from the future that terrorized him. The question is, why did Trunks tell Goku that it was androids 19 and 20? There's 2 logical reasons for this. The in-universe theory is a bit wild and thought-provoking. That theory is that the Trunks that came back to kill Frieza that we saw is not the same one who returned 3 years later to fight the androids. perhaps that is the same Trunks that was killed by Cell in his timeline? That one's a bit of a stretch, but I've heard it before. The real reason is simply that later on in the arc, when he introduced 17 and 18, Akira Toriyama completely forgot that Trunks said to Goku a few chapters prior that it would be 19 and 20 from the future. But keep in mind, Toriyama originally planned that 19 and 20 were to be the main and only villains of this arc, but more on that later. In the Dragon Ball Z anime version, no numbers are given by Trunks to Goku, so clearly the producers realized it was incorrect and chose to omit that line. That's right, folks, sometimes, although rarely, the original manga can make a mistake and be wrong. With the knowledge of the imposing threat looming as well as the medicine brought from the future and given to them by Trunks, Goku and the others train very hard and prepare for the artificial humans. The first two that we meet are 19 and 20. 19 is a 100% synthetic artificial human, not based on a human being, but instead was modeled after a figurine from a command center that Gero brought home as a trophy. It is not explained which command center it was or what was going on at the time. 19 was programmed with the sole purpose of killing Goku and his friends. He appears to fight neck and neck with Goku, but as the fight continues, he gains the upper hand for two reasons. The first reason is that Goku was struck with the heart virus and it weakened him enough to allow 19 to get the advantage. The second reason is because of the key absorption ability. 19 and 20 are unique androids because they are the only two who have this ability. Located on the palms of their hands, there's a special energy harnessing crystal connected to their kinetic energy generator that allows them to not only suck someone else's ki by directly touching them, increasing their own power while doing so, but also absorbing entire ki blast and converting it into energy of its own for them. That means you have to be extra careful when you fight them. It's been believed by many fans throughout the years that had Goku been 100% healthy, he would have been able to beat 19 in spite of 19's energy absorbing ability. Instead, Vegeta shows up, reveals he can now transform like Goku, and even allows 19 to absorb some of his energy before finishing him off with the Big Bang attack. This didn't incapacitate Vegeta because he was so powerful at this time, literally the strongest of the Z fighters during this fight, that it could have taken hours before 19 absorbed all of his energy. Android 20, on the other hand, while also having a synthetic body, he's not 100% artificial. Before dying, Dr. Gero, with help of the already completed 19, performed a transhumanistic experiment by surgically removing his brain and attaching it into the body that would become 20. And thus, artificial human number 20 is Dr. Gero, reborn with a body that won't die of old age and has the same unique abilities as 19. I want to talk a little bit about Dr. Gero for a moment, whom I didn't mention in the Red Ribbon Army Explain video because I wanted to address it here. After Goku destroyed the Red Ribbon Army, Dr. Gero went into hiding, secretly being funded by Red Sun Magenta, as we found out in Dragon Ball Super Superhero, to not only rebuild their forces, but to create advanced weaponry to defeat Goku. At this point, it wasn't just about creating weapons for the army. Now it was a personal revenge story. Gero shifted his focus on designing different types of artificial humans, whom we discuss here. During these early days, he successfully birthed an advanced artificial intelligence that, while it could be programmed to carry out tasks, would not allow itself to be used as a weapon of war like the Red Ribbon's various tanks and battle jackets against the Red Ribbon. Realizing how powerful Goku was thanks to his martial arts training, while also witnessing the terrifying power of Demon King Piccolo, Gero began to experiment with harnessing ki artificially, both in storing it for energy as well as manipulating it for combat. Many people have asked throughout the years how a man-made cyborg can realistically be stronger than somebody like Frieza, but that just goes to show you how much of a genius the Doctor was. I've always speculated that He figured out how to harness nuclear fission in a wild science fiction sort of way to explain how these man-made machinations were this strong. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if Toriyama based these concepts around World War II and the use of the atomic bomb, much like how he did during the Red Ribbon Army saga itself. For the record, Toriyama has never straight up said that himself, so it's just an educated guess. But you have to always remember that what happened in Japan with Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the atomic bomb became probably one of the most historic events, or the most historic event to happen in Japan in the 20th century, and thus Toriyama and every person in Japan knows the impact of that event. But I digress. Let's go ahead and get refocused here. Along the way, Gero created a microscopic spy robot to gather data on the life of Goku, and thus there are recordings of his battles with Piccolo, Vegeta, and even Trunks' fight with Frieza and King Cold. Besides just gathering information, the spy robot was also taking tissue samples from various fighters. This ties directly into his decision to create Cell, but I'll talk more about Cell's origin in the future. Gero was able to gauge how strong Goku was growing, pushing him further and further into creating more and more artificial humans until he would go overboard with his experiments, trying to ensure that Goku will not be able to survive. 19, 20, and even 16 have an internal energy detection system that works almost like a built-in scouter. This provides background data, energy levels, maps, or whatever it's needed to complete the mission. Between 19 and 20, 20 is more powerful, and because he has a genius human brain, he can think at a level way above the artificial intelligence within 19. Another factor that makes them special is the fact that because they are synthetic, they don't internally house ki, and because of that, they cannot be sensed. This makes it extremely difficult to tactically fight them because they can move without being detected and hide for long periods of time. In fact, at one point, Android 20 goes into hiding after realizing that his chances for victory is severely threatened when Piccolo cuts off one of his hands. It seems like 20 is doomed and the battle will soon be over, but things took a twist. During the conflict with 20, Trunks returns from the future and sees the decapitated head of 19 at the location where the androids were supposed to appear and goes into shock. He does not recognize that at all, but knows that it's an android. These were not the same androids from his timeline. He straight up tells the Z Fighters this, which puzzles everyone. Gero escapes to go awaken his next big secret weapon, Artificial Humans 17 and 18, Junanago and Juhachigo, and these are the androids that were the ones that terrorized Trunks' timeline. In the next section of this video, we're discussing the origin and story of 17 and 18, who are very different than any of the androids that we've been introduced to thus far. I want to start this section by quoting series creator Akira Toriyama, who was discussing his creative process as he was writing the Android saga, and a conversation he had with former editor and mentor Torishima. Right around then was when the androids number 19 and number 20 appeared. You weren't my editor or anything anymore, but you specifically called me to say, I thought that the enemies had finally come, but aren't these just a geezer and a fatso? Laughs. In truth, I hadn't planned anyone but 19 and 20 to appear, but there was no helping it, so I brought out 17 and 18. Then you called me up and said, what, this time it's just some brats? So I brought out Cell. That's Toriyama from Daizenshu 2, 1995. So apparently Toriyama originally planned for 19 and 20 to be the arc main villains, and presumably the arc would have been much shorter and very different. Creating 17 and 18 was an editorial suggestion that he took. 17 and 18 were then revealed to be the two artificial humans who terrorized the future timeline, and we first saw them in manga chapter 349. Interestingly, the phrase artificial humans, Jinzo was not created specifically for 17 and 18, but it is most fitting for them. Why? Because 17 and 18 are nothing like the previous other models. 17 and 18 were humans first. Their real names was revealed by Toriyama years after the manga ended as Lapis and Lazuli in an interview. The name pun is from Lapis Lazuli, which is a stone mineral. They were also siblings, something that wouldn't be revealed until the very end of the Cell arc. It was said that 17 was slightly stronger than 18. Okay, so let's reveal what actually happened in something that was never before seen in the series. At some point in between age 750 and 767, Dr. Gero experimented on a new way to create androids and kidnapped 2 teenage delinquents to become his guinea pigs. For the record, this time period is after Goku destroyed the Red Ribbon Army, but sometime before the androids actually appeared. Unlike their predecessors, 17 and 18 were humans first and thus had all of the genetic properties of a normal human with the ability to utilize ki if properly trained. Now, unlike other androids who had an artificial intelligence programmed into their neural processors, which provided a sense of freedom while also a life goal, 17 and 18 kept their human brains unsuppressed and thus had actual free will, which was very dangerous for Dr. Gero, but something he had to allow for 17 and 18 to confidently and fully use their technologically enhanced bodies. This was a different but necessary approach, which would lead to his untimely demise when 17 turned on him. In all timelines, 17 and 18 were given the mission parameters to kill Goku, but by the time they awoke in the future timeline, Goku was already dead, and thus they treated the world like their own personal playground for many years because nobody could stop them. In the present timeline, however, they sought to challenge Goku to a fight and eventually take him out, but really took their time getting there and really didn't seem to care either way. However, Dr. Gero had a backup plan and a much more sinister reason for their creation, and that was to become pawns to allow Cell to reach his perfect form. But we'll talk about that way more when we talk about Cell. 17 and 18 are fascinating characters when it comes to their creation. As I mentioned, they were both genetically enhanced humans with complete free will and access to power beyond imagination due to the cybernetic enhancements built into them. There's been a ton of theories throughout the year that because of Sudu Senin and Tao Pai Pai's connection to the Red Ribbon Army, that Tao's cybernetic enhancements that we witnessed in the 23rd tournament arc were given to him by Gero, but there's been no evidence or statement to verify this claim. Tao being a sort of early prototype for what 17 and 18 would become is a cool idea nonetheless. But besides just enhancements to allow them to tap into higher levels of power and could even train to get much stronger, even beyond the powers of a Super Saiyan at the time of the arc, was also the fact that they both have eternal energy reactors built into them. This means they don't run out of ki and can pretty much fight forever. This makes them very dangerous, and as we witnessed in the Dragon Ball Z fight between Piccolo and 17, even Piccolo, after refusing with Kami to create the Super Namekian and fighting toe-to-toe with 17, was still at risk of losing because 17 never gets tired and Piccolo does, and it was only a matter of time before 17 clinched a victory. Besides just that, 17 and 18 have both high-powered bombs inside of them that could wipe out the planet if activated. Because of these eternal energy reactors, 17 and 18 don't age, or at least they age very slowly. They can have children because those body parts are intact, and we see this first later in the series when 18 has a daughter with Kudadin named Marin. Now, the future timeline counterparts of 17 and 18 are weaker than the present timeline versions, probably due to the butterfly effect of Trunks' first trip back in time, but are also way more atrocious. 17 and 18 from the present are nowhere near close to being as sinister And both of them find peace in their lives and even join the good team a few times. However, future 17 and 18 had a much darker outcome, both of them being killed by future Trunks at the very end of the arc after returning to his timeline a much stronger fighter. In the present timeline, both were absorbed by Cell to make him the perfect killing machine. Cell puked up 18 during the Cell games when Gohan was pummeling him, and 17 died inside of Cell when Gohan finished off Super Perfect Cell, but was brought back to life and had the bombs in their bodies removed by Shenlong. 18 stuck around and became a part of the B team, with her next highlight being in the Buu arc when she worked out a deal with Mr. Satan to throw the fight during the 25th Tenkaichi Budokai final to allow Satan to keep his credibility with the public for a large sum of money. She was later killed by Majin Buu, but was eventually brought back to life. 17 was seen briefly one more time in the Buu arc in a cameo appearance at the end, donating some of his energy to power Goku's Super Genki Dama. Even years after the manga ended, there was even more lore added, as Toriyama would reveal in interviews that 17 eventually got married and started his own family off-screen and got a job as a park ranger. 17 would return to having an important role in Dragon Ball Super, but first, he was a big player in one section of the anime-only continuation to DBZ, Dragon Ball GT. Dragon Ball GT did some interesting things with 17, specifically during the Super 17 arc, where both 17 and 18 would become the focal point once again. Let's talk a little bit about Super 17. While in Hell, Machine Mutant Dr. Miyu and Dr. Gero created a new version of 17 called Hellfighter 17. While Hellfighter 17 may resemble the original 17 in appearance and voice, he was built with machine mutant technology and has an artificial brain. This was done to prevent this version of 17 from betraying his masters, but Dr. Miyu made sure to program an override to put him above all, including Dr. Gero. Even though the horrible GT English dub changed this for no reason, Hellfighter 17 is much stronger than 17, but his existence alone was not the grand plan. His true purpose was to fuse with the original 17 to create Super 17. Hellfighter 17 was able to brainwash regular 17 into fusing with him, and this creates the main enemy that the arc is named after. Super 17 resembles a taller version of 17 with a much more sinister face and longer hair. Inside, he is pure evil and also very egotistical, much like Cell was. Super 17 challenges SS4 Goku in combat. He has machine mutant tech from Hellfighter 17, which makes him a serious threat to the world. He kills Dr. Gero first, much unlike the original version did in the past, but later even turns on Dr. Miyu. This is because something interesting happened that neither scientist could count on. The soul of 17, the original 17, still existed inside of Super 17. 17 has a sibling bond with 18, and thus 18 was able to awaken 17's love for her from within Super 17, allowing him to overcome his own programming. Ultimately, the programming of the original 17 would lead to him exposing Super 17's weakness to 18 and Goku, allowing Goku to destroy Super 17. Super 17 was only in GT for about 5 episodes, but is still remembered by many to this day. After that, we would not see 17 again until Dragon Ball Super in the Tournament of Power arc, when he was part of Team Universe 7. During the recruitment portion of the Universal Survival arc, it was suggested that 17 join Universe 7's team by 18 and Gohan. So prior to the start of the tournament itself, 17 tested himself against Goku using his blue-haired form and was able to compete neck and neck. As an audience, we already knew that 17 and 18 could train to become stronger, but little did we know they could become that strong, which means that 17 very much focused on his training off-screen for many years. By this point, 17 was much less of a rebel and more of a family man, matured and refocused. He didn't get involved in many of the battles of the past few years and stuck to his own private life. There's been a debate about the power of 17 that has led to many believing that he was the third strongest of Team Universe 7, behind only Goku and Vegeta, which makes much more sense with the anime version than the manga. 17 also shows himself to be a much smarter fighter in the Tournament of Power, going so far as to convincingly fake his own death, which was a key strategy that led to Universe 7's survival and victory. 17, representing Universe 7, was the winner and sole survivor, and while his dream was to own a luxury boat, he instead did the selfless thing and wished to resurrect all of the universes that were wiped out by the Omni King. It was revealed then that this was the righteous wish Zeno had hoped for, and if the winner didn't make that wish, he would just blink them out of existence too. This was the full on-screen character arc for 17 finalized. 17 would return to help the Earth's forces once again alongside 18 in the moral arc of Dragon Ball Super, but has not been seen since then as of the creation of this video. 18 appeared for the final battle against Cell Max in the Dragon Ball Super superhero movie. In the next section, I want to talk about the two artificial humans who may have had the most personal connection to Gero. So personal, in fact, that he created them based on his closest loved ones, his wife and son. We discuss 16 and 21 next. Just Let's start with 16. Artificial Human 16 was awakened by 17 and 18 in the laboratory in Dragon Ball Manga Chapter 350, which correlates with Dragon Ball Z Episode 134. 16 was not mentioned whatsoever by Trunks in his dreaded warning because apparently he was never awakened in his timeline and remained asleep in the laboratory. This could be because the 17 and 18 in that timeline were more sinister and didn't want to wait to cause mayhem, or perhaps were afraid of having to deal with 16. Either way, his appearance was a surprise for Trunks. In real life, 16's appearance was inspired by Arnold Schwarzenegger, much like Metallic was. In universe, however, we found out through an interview with Toriyama years later that his appearance was directly modeled from Gero's deceased son. In Dragon Ball Super Superhero, we see his son given a name, Gero. Gero was a Red Ribbon Army member who was killed in battle ages ago, and not much more is revealed about him than that. We don't know who killed him or exactly when it happened, but Gero models 16 after him. Do not get confused. 16 is not Gero with enhancements or Gero's brain in his head or something. He was 100% mechanical, unlike 17 and 18, but like his predecessor Android 8. But they have more in common than that. It turns out that 16 is in fact way more powerful than 17 and 18. But if that's the case, why was he considered a failed model by his creator? 16 was programmed with one mission, to kill Son Goku. That's it. Like the T-800 from Terminator, 16 has a neural net processor, which is a learning computer. It gets smarter and understands new data at a rapid rate. However, much like Ader, there was a programming flaw that Dr. Gero could never get past, his connection to nature. 16's mission may have been to kill Goku, but besides him, it's not in his nature to kill, especially when it comes to animals. 16 has a soft interior, an appreciation for Mother Nature, and is far more than just some ruthless killer. Because of this fact, Gero saw him as a failure. It's unclear if this soft side is because some of Gero's personality may have been interjected into 16's processor, or it could be a programming mishap, but I would point it more towards the second option because of the fact that 16 existed in the manga decades before Toriyama ever even thought up Gero. Plus, we really know nothing about Gero's personality. Some have theorized that 16 was purposely meant to be non-aggressive to anybody but Goku to protect the planet from being destroyed due to the frightening power of 16's internal self-destruct bomb. Or perhaps there was another mission parameter in him after Goku was dead, perhaps to maybe help humanity or become Gero's assistant? Who really knows? When 17 and 18 fought the Z Fighters, 16 did not interject, likely because of this programming. 16 began to develop a bond with 17 and 18, which would lead to 16 stepping up to fight for the first time against Cell to protect 17 from being absorbed. This was the first time we witnessed his incredible power, as he was able to pummel the same imperfect Cell who nearly killed the Super Namekian Piccolo and had his crosshairs set on 17. Unfortunately, Cell escaped 16's clutches and successfully absorbed 17 and later 18. 16 was damaged in the melee with the second form Cell and was taken to Capsule Corp for repair in preparation for the Cell games. Dr. Brief and Bulma both worked on repairing 16, and during their surgery discovered that 16 had a bomb implanted inside of him made up of a dreadful power, perhaps beyond a thermonuclear weapon. For the safety of the Earth, they removed the device without 16's knowledge. When the Cell games happen and Goku does not successfully defeat Cell, many believe that it was a hopeless situation as Gohan stepped up to face him. 16 jumps into action, bear hugging Cell from behind, attempting to activate his self-destruct mechanism. It doesn't work, and Cell smashes 16's body, leaving a bunch of parts and his head. This would lead to 16's most important moment in the series, as the character who gave Gohan a speech trying to get the boy to understand that even if he does not want to fight, in this case he must fight in order to protect the world with all of its living creatures that he and Gohan both love. Cell steps on his head, crushing 16 as we see his processor shut down, which was the final situation needed for Gohan to tap into his rage and anger, leading him to transform beyond his limits. This transformation would eventually lead to Gohan killing Cell and saving the solar system, and 16 had a very big part in it. When the wishes were made to bring back people killed by Cell, 16 did not return. For years, the reasoning given was that because 16 was completely artificial, that he doesn't have a soul and thus would not qualify for the afterlife or revival. However, this is a direct contradiction to Android 8, who died and was brought back not only in the Path to Power film, but also in the Majin Buu arc when the Earth was destroyed. There's various theories behind this, which I won't get into here, but some are more plausible than not. Will 16 ever get brought back? It doesn't seem likely. 16 was designed to resemble Gero's son, and with Dragon Ball Super Superhero, we discovered that his wife Vomi was the inspiration for Android 21. Vomi died at some point years before the Android arc and was known to be some sort of scientific researcher for the Red Ribbon Army. She had another unnamed son with Gero besides Gevo, who would later give birth to Dr. Hedo. Vomi's name is a pun on the word vomit, which coincides with Gero's name, which is also a pun on vomit or puking. Despite being a villain, you kind of feel bad for Gero in losing both his wife and son. Not much else is known about the human being Vomi, but her artificial human counterpart is a different story. Android 21 made her debut in the 2018 video game Dragon Ball FighterZ. Toriyama has often designed characters for the various Dragon Ball video games that aren't part of the main story. So as of right now, all of 21's story is only part of the video games and not any of the major Dragon Ball continuities. Initially, 21 works for Capsule Corporation of all places. She begins to investigate various aspects of the Dragon Ball world, such as the training room, the site of the Cell games, the abandoned laboratory, and others. Her android design is extremely unique, as it seems to be a kind of biological and mechanical hybrid, possibly being composed of alien technology as well as some demonic fission. However, there's some debate about her true origin. At one point, she claims to actually be a converted and enhanced Vomi, except without all of the memories. In another instance, she is her own being, created to resemble Vomi and her brilliant mind, similar to Cell, and notes that her creation date is 10 years before she appears, despite resembling a fully grown human adult. Her biology is fascinating, because she is basically like Cell, where she has information collected from spy bots and the cells of many strong warriors, but at some point she inherits Majin Buu's cells, which create a major issue and likely the cause of her unbalance. Android 21 has a bit of a split personality, possibly because of haphazard programming. She has a peaceful side and a warrior side, which can be considered a problem. She's internally aware that her human template was the mother of Gero, and thus has a deep connection to 16. However, she does not remember being Vomi, nor does she even remember that Dr. Gero was Gero's father. It makes me wonder if Gero purposely deleted those files in her databanks, and if so, why? She has a bizarre compulsion to eat food to almost an uncontrollable degree. The longer she goes without feeding, the more irritable she is, and the more her evil side takes control. When she's in this state, she becomes a psychotic monster, wanting to devour other warriors with high power, very similar to Majin Buu. Because of the added cells of Majin Buu, she becomes extremely difficult to defeat. This type of bipolar behavior is a gift and a curse for 21, as her good side is often pondering what the meaning of her creation was, since she's not just your basic artificial killer. All 21 wants to do in her psychotic state is feed and grow in power. She creates an army of clones to do her bidding. And in one story, she absorbs them for power. At one point, the evil side of 21 separates from the good, something we've seen in the past with both Majin Buu and the child of Katatsu when Piccolo and Kami-sama were one being. This would lead to the good side sacrificing herself to defeat the evil side. No matter which version we discuss, she is ridiculously powerful and dangerous. In the future, I may do a deeper dive into 21's story. I mentioned Dr. Gero, and that's where our story takes us next, to 2022's Dragon Ball Super Superhero, featuring the uprising of a new Red Ribbon Army and the creation of the Gamma models. Dragon Ball Super Superhero brought us the next generation. The grandson of Dr. Gero was Dr. Gero, who had PhDs in both medicine and science and was in many ways even more brilliant than his grandpa. We find out that Gero was experimenting with Jinzo Ningen technology before ever meeting Commander Red's grandson, Magenta. Dr. Gero was a controversial figure in the science community for many years due to his unorthodox experiments, most notably reanimating dead bodies and converting them into experimental androids. He was caught and arrested after law enforcement discovered these experiments working at a convenience store. Years later, he was convinced by Magenta to take his genius to the next level. It's stated in the movie that Gero suspected all along that Magenta was lying to him about the Red Ribbon's true nature, but wanted to use Magenta's wealth to fund his experiments. This would lead to the creation of the Gammas. Gamma 1 came first, and he was created based on an in-universe fictional superhero whom was never named as of the creation of this video. Gamma 2 soon followed. On their belt buckles they have the Greek letter Gamma, the upside down L. That's where the in-universe design comes from, but in the real world, Toriyama grew up a huge fan of tokusatsu, which are live-action special effects TV shows, and one of the biggest ever from Japan was 1966's Ultraman. Ultraman became a cultural icon for Japan and a show that we know for sure Toriyama watched even before Dragon Ball began because he drew Ultraman into Dr. Slump. The Gammas were inspired by Ultraman and other Toku heroes, which explains why their wacky poses are so reminiscent of them. Many assume these poses came from Sailor Moon, but Sailor Moon was also inspired by the ridiculous posing of the Toku shows from the 60s and 70s, such as Kamen Rider and Super Sentai. Obviously, the Ginyu Force is a direct influence. Someday I'll do a whole video about Toku's influence on Dragon Ball, but nonetheless, the Gammas are ripped right from decades past, which is precisely why Gamma 1 tells Piccolo that he has a retro look. That's Dragon Ball being self-aware. Gamma 2 was based off of Gamma 1, and they're sort of like twin brothers, even though Gamma 1 obviously was built first. Gamma 1 tends to be the calmer and more focused of the two, while Gamma 2 is more lighthearted. This was directly inspired by the original Kamen Rider series of the 1970s. Although seemingly not as advanced as Cell when it comes to knowledge of combat, their bodies appear to withstand much more damage. We know that Hedo had access to newer technology not available during the time when his grandpa created the original models, and thus Gamma 1 and 2 are more powerful than any mortal in Dragon Ball Z, and are likely composed of some kind of advanced metallic alloy that can withstand extreme heat and extreme cold temperatures, which is shown in the film when Gamma 2 travels into space. They can also take a huge amount of damage before shutting down, even from an expert in the martial arts. What's interesting though is that even though they can withstand ki blasts, neither model can produce their own ki blasts, which is why they're equipped with special ray guns that can also create artificial force fields and things like that. When it comes to their fighting strength, that's where the controversy comes in. Piccolo states that Gamma 1 and 2 are on par with Goku and Vegeta, but he doesn't state which forms of Goku and Vegeta he's referring to, and the movie does not outline what part of the timeline they're talking about. Even though Superhero in theory takes place after the Granola and Moro arcs, the script was written by Toriyama before those two arcs finished, and thus we don't have an accurate power gauge to create a true comparison. They are the mightiest androids of all time so far, second only to Cell Max. The Gammas are powered by a high-powered thermal energy battery that starts at 100% and drains itself down to 0. Unlike 17 and 18, whose tech allows them to virtually never get tired, the Gammas do have a finite level of power, but it takes a very long time or a very powerful attack to drain that battery. Unlike 19 and 20, they can't absorb ki from their palms, so it is what it is. Most superpowered mortals would fall into complete exhaustion before the Gammas are even at the 80% level. They can last a long time, but clearly Dr. Hedo had other tricks in his back pocket that he didn't utilize for the Gammas. Perhaps they themselves were early models, and by the time he gets to Gamma 17 or Gamma 18, then we'll see an unbeatable force, but for what they are bonkers strong. Once the misguided androids discover that the red ribbon is not the good side, they join the good side and team up with Gohan and the others against Cell Max. During the skirmish, Gamma 2 sacrifices himself by launching himself like a torpedo directly into Cell Max from outer space at a blistering speed. He manages to cut off Cell Max's forearm, but ultimately it cost him his life. This helped weaken Cell Max enough for Orange Piccolo and Gohan Beast to finish the job. Gamma 1 and Dr. Hedo would later join Bulma as employees for Capsule Corporation, using their technology for good instead of evil. Dr. Hedo states in the film that he can make more Gamma models, so perhaps in the future we'll see a Gamma 3, a Gamma 4, or some other technological terror, perhaps on the good side. But right now, let's go to the final section of the video. I have to talk briefly about some of the androids featured in the Korean MMORPG Dragon Ball Online because they are very interesting upgrades to some of the older models. Toriyama was involved in creating that game, and I kind of find them cool in a way. Earlier I mentioned the Commander Red inspired Android 9, but there's way more like him in the Red Pants army. Android 8000 is an upgraded model loosely based on the design for Android 8, except with different colors and more power. They come in base, EX, and MX models and are boss fights in Dragon Ball Online, obviously unlike the lovable Android 8 that we all like. These guys are not nice guys. Similarly, we have Android 19000, who resembles the face and arms of Android 19, but has the yellow body armor chassis like 16. Android 19000 SP is a more advanced model and serves as a boss. Like their original counterparts, they also can absorb energy. You may be wondering why I haven't discussed some of the other Android type characters like Orale, the Machine Mutants from Dragon Ball GT, OG73 from Dragon Ball Super, and so on. Perhaps in the future I will do dedicated videos to explaining these, but because they weren't part of the Red Ribbon library of artificial humans, they weren't really covered in this second video of a 3-part series rooted in the Red Ribbon Army. Speaking of which, the conclusion of this 3-part series is focused on Cell as we go into the entire story of Cell as well as his knockoffs Cell X and of course Cell Max from Dragon Ball Super Superhero. Stay tuned because we're finishing up this trilogy with a bang. I hope you liked this massive video and I hope you check these out as well. Take care.